Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Today we're going to talk about a number of headlines directly and indirectly related to Bible prophecy. So let's dive right in. The first one we're going to talk about today is from the Jerusalem Post. It says, Israel bans use of cash for purchases larger than 6,000 shekels. So that's the equivalent of just a little bit less than $1,800. It says a new law is set to take effect in Israel starting August 1st, so yesterday, that will ban payments of large sums of money in cash and bank checks. The goal of the reform, according to a statement issued by Israel's tax authority, is to fight organized crime, money laundering, and tax noncompliance. And I would also add that I think that the point is to get rid of cash so that governments can track us, regardless of whether we're involved in organized crime or money laundering or anything else like that. So we read, under the new law, any payment to a business above $1,700, and it comes out to, I think, $1,783 at today's exchange rate, must be made using alternative methods such as a digital transfer or a debit card. Trading between private citizens who are not listed as business owners will be limited to $4,360 or 15,000 shekels in cash. This is another step in Israel's fight against the use of cash. So there we get to the real reason behind this. Previously, cash up to the amount of 11,000 shekels or $3,200 could be used in business deals. We want the public to reduce the use of cash money, Tamar Bareka, who is in charge of executing the law on behalf of Israel's tax authority, told the Media Line. The goal is to reduce cash fluidity in the market, mainly because crime organizations tend to rely on cash. By limiting the use of it, criminal activity is much harder to carry out. You know what's also much harder to carry out is protecting your privacy and protecting yourself from the government and government overreach and authoritarianism. When everything is pushed to electronic transactions and there's no more use of cash, the government can gain insight into everything that you're doing, everyone you're interacting with, whether you have firearms or food or gold or whatever it is they determine that you shouldn't have, they're going to be able to have insight into. So your privacy is gone. And what this does ultimately is it leads to a cashless society, and it builds out the platform for the Mark of the Beast system outlined in Revelation 13. So this is yet another sign that we see that we're moving toward that system. So let's go on to our next news story. This one's from oilprice.com. It says Saudi Arabia reveals oil production capacity limits. Saudi Arabia, the world's top crude oil exporter, will not have additional capacity to increase production above the 13 million barrels per day it is pledged to have by 2027, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told the leaders of the United States, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq at a summit this weekend. We also stress the importance of continuing to inject and encourage investments in fossil energy and its clean technologies over the next 2 decades to meet the growing global demand, with the importance of assuring investors that the policies adopted do not pose a threat to their investments, to avoid their reluctance to invest, and to ensure that no shortage of energy supply will affect the international economy, he said. The kingdom will do its part in this regard, as it announced an increase in its production capacity, now that's the key word, capacity, to 13 million barrels per day, after which the kingdom will not have any additional capacity to increase production. So let's think about that for a moment. The world at the present moment runs off of fossil fuels. That's the main energy source, whether it's oil or natural gas, coal. Fossil fuels are what drive the world economy and economic growth. If you limit the amount that's available, you're limiting economic growth. You may be even pushing it backward. And so what Saudi Arabia, is the world's largest oil exporter, is saying is essentially we've hit the upper limit of what either they want to do or are available to do. We can argue all day about peak oil and whether we've reached that situation or not, whether it's a man-made policy situation where we've decided not to go and get what's available. But the point is, even if we decided to explore every oil resource at our disposal on the face of the planet tomorrow, it still takes years to bring that new production online and make it available to consumers. So what we're going to see, at least for the next several years, is we're going to have oil shortages, oil supply crunches, and you're not going to see prices for fossil fuel products coming down anytime soon. Of course, the market's going to fluctuate, but ultimately, we're not going to see a major dive in those prices unless we have a global depression that pushes the demand for those things down, and that's its own crisis. So, what does all this mean? It means that the world is, based on whether choice or hitting some upper limits, is running out of resources that are vital for economic growth. And resources often lead to wars when they're limited in nature and different countries want them. You're going to see some issues from that. So this is one to keep an eye on. Next, we'll head into this story. It says, as Indian stocks dwindle, Bangladesh pays more to import wheat. Now, we've talked before, and we had a video yesterday where we talked about this, a video last week where we talked about this. We've been talking about this all year. There is going to be a food shortage as we move into the latter part of this year and into 2023. This is for various reasons. We're seeing more of this now, and what countries that are reliant on imports in order to feed themselves are going to be looking to import more. So here we see this headline that Bangladesh is looking to import more wheat. And so then we move on and we see, well, Turkey plans to import more wheat in 2022 and 2023. Makes sense? Oh, Japan seeks 122,103 tons of food wheat via tenders. Lebanon's parliament votes to spend World Bank loan on wheat. Egypt diversifies wheat suppliers as large international purchases resume. Yemenis hope to import wheat from India as food runs low, according to their minister. Indonesia wheat imports increase amid market uncertainty. So as you see, across the board, Indonesia is the fourth most populous nation in the world. They're increasing imports. All these other nations want to increase imports. We already know that the two largest nations in the world, which are India and China, China is not a net exporter at all. So you're going to see much more increased demand for grains, particularly wheat right now, but it's going to go to pretty much every agricultural commodity across the board as we move into the latter part of this year. So why do I bring this all up? Well, let's look at wheat exports by country. We come down here and see who's exporting this. If all these countries want to increase their imports, not just continue importing, but increase what they imported last year, well, by definition, somebody else has to be exporting more because every nation on earth can't increase their imports at the same time. somebody has to be sending that to them. So who's number one? Russia, right? And Russia has made it very clear that, well, they'll do business with you if you're on their friendly list. If not, it's going to be a lot harder to do business with them. So if you're one of those unfriendly nations, I wouldn't count on Russia to be filling the gap from that. Then we've got the United States. Remains to be seen. We've seen there are drought conditions, heat, all of the fertilizer and herbicide, pesticide, diesel issues. We'll see whether or not the United States can help fill that gap. Same applies to Australia. Canada, we already discussed. It didn't happen retroactively, but they're moving forward saying, oh, we want to cut our fertilizer usage 30% by the year 2030. So they're already going to start curtailing their yields. So I wouldn't count on Canada to be filling this gap. While Ukraine, as we learned yesterday, is expecting to produce 50% less. I would think that may be the high water mark for them. I would be surprised if they're able to produce 50% of what they did pre-war under these conditions. So then we keep going down the list. We've got France, Argentina, Germany, Romania. We just read about yesterday, Romania's wheat yield was down 43% from a year ago. We read about Hungary. Their yield was down 26% from a year ago. So who's going to fill this gap? Well, I found this right here, this article on NASDAQ. It says German 2022 winter wheat crop up 1% year over year. So 1%, that might help. But then we read that the French wheat harvest is falling 5.6%. So we can write France off as filling that gap. And then we learn that Argentina's wheat forecast is lowered due to, whoops, looks like I've viewed my free articles. But their wheat forecast is lower. So Argentina was 7 on the list, France was 6. So maybe Germany supplied 3.6% of the total worldwide wheat exports, and their wheat is expected to be up 1%. But pretty much everybody else on the list is either we don't know yet or we know that it's down. So who's going to fill that gap? I don't think anybody's going to be able to fill that gap, especially when you figure that Ukraine was 8.5% of all wheat exports, and you just chop them in half at least. So there's going to be a large hole in the wheat export market that needs to be filled. And as we saw, there's plenty of countries that are willing to pay whatever it takes to get their hands on that. Because if not, they can't feed their people, and they're looking at starvation, famine, and revolution. So expect food prices. Again, it depends on where you are. Either it's going to be unavailable, or if it's available, it's going to be at a much higher price. Come later this year and into 2023, people are starting to wake up to this. So that leads us into our next article. And this one is from The Organic Prepper. It says, Amazon bans the sale of opaque mylar food storage bags to, quote, combat drug trafficking, right? And now I am not familiar with the world of drug trafficking. I will admit that. But I do know that drug trafficking and mylar bags have been around for many years. And this is the first I've ever heard of mylar bags being this very important tool in the hands of drug dealers. So it seems rather strange that they would ban these now. So this ban goes into effect on August 5th. And of course, these mylar bags are used to store for long-term food storage. So somebody out there doesn't want you preparing for the crisis they see coming and they know is coming, because food is not going to be as abundant in the months ahead as it has been in the past. And for whatever reason, they don't want you to store that. And that brings us to our next article. This is from the New York Post. And it says, Spam goes on lockdown due to inflation in New York City. And it says at Duane Reade's store in the Port Authority Bus Depot, the shelf-stable product, only $3.99 a can, is now being stocked in plastic anti-theft cases. So guys, we've seen the food shortages are coming. We know they're coming. We know that they're banning these mylar bags. Now we're having to have spam put in these tamper-proof anti-theft devices. I want you to think through for a minute where this logically leads to, because we have seen, and particularly in cities in the United States like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, we've seen these flash mobs that will go into Target and Walgreens and jewelry stores, and a whole bunch of people will show up at once, take things off the shelf, and run out the door. And there's nobody there to stop them. A part of that is the legal authorities aren't prosecuting those things, and they know that in those areas. But we're seeing theft like this all over the place, and especially as food skyrockets and people are desperate, they're going to want to steal that food. So what does that mean? Are we going to see these flash mobs at grocery stores? And if we do, you can be certain that armed guards will be posted at those grocery stores, right? And then what's the next logical step? Well, rationing of food supplies, because if you buy more than your neighbor, well, that's not fair, right? So be prepared for everything to be under lock and key at your grocery store. Prepare to have armed guards there. Prepare to have to show some sort of app or identity card, and not tomorrow, but months from now, a year from now. I don't know when, but it's coming, because just like with cash, that's what this all comes back to, right? They banned the mylar bags because they don't want the drug dealers using them. Well, drug dealers use phones. You aren't banning those. There's a whole bunch of things that drug dealers use, but they want to ban cash and mylar bags, and all the food's going to be on lockdown. And all of that is because what? Control, right? This is all part of the development of this mark of the beast system and platform. We're seeing it right before our eyes. People will do anything for food. We saw that in the time of Pharaoh and Joseph, right? So Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. He stored up the grain for the 7 years of plenty, and when the 7 years of famine came, Egypt took all the surrounding nations and put them under their control, because they gave everything they had, all their land, all their property, anything they had, all their precious jewels, to Pharaoh to eat. And so we're seeing the setup for the same thing is going to happen in our day and time. Exactly when that is completed, when that happens, I don't know. That remains to be seen, but it's one we're keeping an eye on. So guys, make sure to leave your comments below, like this, share this. Thanks for joining us today, and God willing, we'll talk tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.